Hello, everybody, and welcome back to TF. It's
the free one.
Free episode this week. It is Riley. It is November. It is Milo. It is Hussein for the first approximately half hour. And we are rejoined by returning guest. It is former Bank of England economist turned noticer of things,
Rachel Reeves. Hi, welcome to the show.
I've actually so trying to stop people saying former Bank of England economist. It was 30 years ago, and my career was, I'll tell you how badly my career was doing. I was very nearly the regulator for prepaid funerals in the UK.
Oh, man. I love the ads for prepaid funerals. I get them at the gym all the time because they have daytime TV on.
What gym are you going to?
The gym where you're making yourself more unhealthy. And because I remember seeing these as a kid or like whatever, but they seem to be more of them now. And they strike me more now because it's like, this is the cheapest cremation you can get. And then like suddenly you're looking at it and you're like, hang on, is that one of the Spice Girls they've got doing this?
Did I ever tell you, I don't know whether this is like a prepaid funeral thing, but it was like related to like deaths. But my first crush when I was younger was the woman who did the Scottish Widows ad.
With the cape.
With the cape, yeah.
Sure.
Yeah, so in that vibe, you know.
Dan, you should have been the regulator for the Scottish Widows lady. Like, which lady they can make the Scottish Widow.
You folks will not know this, but that widow has got successively hotter with every single ad campaign they have done for the last... When I was Hussein's age, she actually looked like a widow. But then she kind of started looking a bit Nigella. Then she started looking a bit hotter than that. And, you know, now she's absolutely smoking widow.
Inflation comes for us all.
Yeah, they're going to change the name to Scottish MILFs.
We need like sort of quantitative easing of MILFs is the thing. Otherwise, I'm not competitive in this market unless we like have some kind of state intervention.
You want a protectionist MILF.
Yeah, absolutely. I want MILF tariffs urgently.
I would love it, though, to have understood like the marketing process. Like, what would that marketing presentation have been? It would have just been like Don Draper comes in, writing down hotter widow.
Me in front of a whiteboard. Yeah, hotter MILF.
Listen, what if the Scottish widow was Lucy Pinder? Has anyone considered this?
Kelly Brook tragically widowed in like Gretna.
What if we got some of the Love Island bimbos involved with our insurance system?
Bro, don't call them bimbos.
This discussion is set in the 90s.
Yeah, I see. A comic character of you in the 90s. Yeah,
it's funny also. Every year, the Hiscock's cock gets much, much longer.
Yeah, and the fucking like Lloyd's TSB horse gets like way hotter too.
Huge naturals on the Lloyd's TSB horse.
Churchill the dog is an XL bully.
It is my pleasure to welcome Dan back to the show. We are not just here to talk to him about what's the sexiest insurance company, although I'm sure we could fill an hour with that. Instead, we are here to talk to him a little bit about his book, The Unaccountability Machine.
But before we do that, the new like woman in the Admiral adverts in the Admiral's uniform, like pretty good idea, I thought. Like, you know, maybe they're onto something with that.
So we are going to be talking about Dan's book, The Unaccountability Machine, which I think is a good history of how to think of the systems of government that everyone seems to be clamoring to operate and give to their friends, and how those are set up to, let's say, deflect a demand to ever do anything for anybody. Also, there's a story about how Schiphol Airport fed about 600 or so imported squirrels into an industrial shredder, and it was nobody's fault.
Sometimes it happens.
The fact that you specified imported squirrels, I know to like justify their presence in the airport, but like that made it sound like a kind of much more valuable commodity. My like prestige imported squirrels.
Time was the squirrel on the ING insurance ad was not so sexy, but then they started importing these squirrels from overseas.
Only Schiphol Airport can reduce 500 imported squirrels to a soup-like homogenate in under 30 seconds.
But more importantly, only that airport was able to so brilliantly do a kind of cognitive dance that it was nobody's fault, but it was entirely inevitable that the squirrels were reduced to the same thing they make chicken nuggets out of.
Their press release is actually studied in business schools as a masterpiece of crisis PR.
Yeah.
Because it was just one of these things, like, nobody really goes into the airline business because they want to shred squirrels.
You would presume not.
Yeah, and what had happened is that the Dutch government had said all imported squirrels have to comply with biosecurity and have their paperwork, or they will be sent back or euthanized at the expense of the importer.
Little squirrel fingerprints or squirrel retinal scans.
Yeah, and everyone had thought, well, this is never actually going to happen. It's more of a kind of threat to make sure everyone complies. But KLM, for it was them, thought, well, we better buy some kind of small animal disposal system that went online.
We bought this from the most sinister man on the internet.
Well,
We bought it from Jamie Oliver.
Pretty much, yes, because they bought it from the poultry industry. The industry which destroys, male chicks in, well, there's no other word for it, shredders. And so this was put in there, and no one really paid attention to it. Everyone thought, well, we've complied with the regulations, we can go about our business. And without knowing it, they had set up a system whereby, as happened, 400 and odd squirrels were imported from China without the proper paperwork, couldn't send them back. The exporter wasn't taking calls, couldn't send them there, couldn't keep them in Schiphol. And so at this point, in the press release, they say someone should have thought, you can't shred 400 squirrels, that's repulsive. But, if you work in a shed, you're not usually allowed to question the government. And so they got shredded. The Van der Meen Foundation for the Shelter of Squirrels, which is the Netherlands' only specialist squirrel rescue shelter, were really pissed off. They weren't even consulted and said so.
That was their 9/11. That was the worst thing they could think of. In squirrel terms, that was the worst thing that could happen to them relative to a passenger jetliner.
Yeah, they got a specific apology in the press release. There were questions asked in the Dutch parliament, but everyone just concluded no one had intended to do this.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone had constructed a system under which it was inevitable that at some point 400 squirrels were going to get shredded, because everyone had constructed a system in which everyone thought it was everyone else's job to not shred the squirrels. And when you actually start looking at these sorts of systems more generally, things like this happen all the time. The National Health Service doesn't actually literally shred squirrels.
That we know of.
There's a 6-month waiting list to get squirrels shredded.
Yeah, but it's got loads of systems where everyone says that it's someone else's responsibility for bad things not to happen, and consequently bad things do happen, like thousands of people getting transfused with HIV-positive blood.
I think sort of bringing that from the very fun unless you're a squirrel, worked squirrel example, over to things like the NHS shows that it's like many of the systems that administer very important parts of our lives, like will we be paid if we're not working? Will we be taken care of if we're sick? Are constructed in such a way as to make bad things happen to us that aren't our fault. I mean, November, you mentioned to me, right, that I believe the NHS is now taking up some of the recommendations of the CAST report.
Oh, this isn't exactly on the NHS. So this is the Secretary for Health, Victoria Atkins, using emergency powers as a pure act of spite on the way out to ban the prescription of puberty blockers to under 18s, specifically for the treatment of gender dysphoria. Something which Wes Streeting, the Shadow Health Secretary, has been like, yeah, this is cool. I would probably keep doing this, which is repulsive and which will feed many trans children into the industrial poultry shredder. And that's something which is like very attributed is the thing. I think that's a different kind of evil shit, right? The disattributability there, if you like, is in the kind of, no one is actually telling trans children to kill themselves, right? They're just like making the conditions for them to live like impossible.
They're inviting them to go through puberty after the age of 18.
Yeah, exactly. Just hold it, you know, just like really like, you know, knuckle down. Do like Wim Hof breathing on your
that
puberty.
meme of the kid in the classroom holding in a fart, just like desperately trying not to pubesce.
Just like trying to stop your voice from breaking. Yeah. So slightly different thing, but also an extremely depressing thing that has happened in British politics today.
Slightly different, but I would say not completely different, because she's not actually saying that she's doing this just simply to grab votes and attack a vulnerable group of people, even though that's what's actually happening.
Yeah.
She's saying she's implementing the Cass report.
That's true. And the Cass report does not say this. Yeah.
Yeah, the Cass report is not actually saying this itself, but also the Cass report is claiming that it's just summarizing the objective science. So if you're looking at who we should actually blame for this, everyone's trying to point to 100 and odd authors of medical research papers in Canadian universities who didn't even say that. And so everyone's passing the responsibility and the accountability down the line in exactly the same way.
It's kind of, who will rid me of these turbulent squirrels, you know?
Yeah.
There was one Canadian academic who did say that, and no one ever remembers him.
We are kind of vindicated too, because I remember saying about the review when it came out that what it actually says didn't matter, right? Because it was what it was going to be used to justify. And this is a good example, I think.
Yeah, I remember that episode.
And that's how you can tell also that like something is, let's say, known to be, if not popular with your base, then at least something that you can be proud of as a human is if you're doing it and you're trying to say, well, I'm not doing it. Of course, I'm just implementing the recommendations of what everyone sort of has agreed is in this report. Who agreed? Oh, everyone. And I think really what we get down to, one of the themes that runs through the book that you've written is this sort of naked exercise of power. And it's where so almost like logic puzzles that power puts around itself to entangle you before you are able to tangle with it.
I can't get hormones anymore because Wes Streeting is playing Mist. It's like turning a big crank.
If these things had been marketed differently and been around in the 1990s, then someone would have said, there's a pill you can give your kids to delay puberty until they're emotionally ready for the consequences. And I would definitely have been on them. And so would everyone in my class. And indeed, I would be kind of filing a prescription as soon as you meet your daughter's first boyfriend. They should actually put them in Cocoa Pops, is my view.
They could have done fucking product placement on Kevin and Perry.
Yeah, no, but they should be like included as an ingredient in Cocoa Pops, because if you're still eating Cocoa Pops for breakfast, you're probably not ready to go through puberty yet.
That we're actually advocating, we're taking it one step further. Not just puberty blockers for those that want them. Puberty blockers universally and mandatorily. No more puberty.
Yeah. That's right. No one ever. We just keep everyone on them. We're all just like little hairless boys.
That would be popular with the conservative electoral base.
You have to stop eating Cocoa Pops when you develop the desire to fuck the Cocoa Pops monkey.
The Cocoa Pops monkey keeps getting hotter every year.
Yeah, the huge tits on the Cocoa Pops monkey were a bit too far.
So I want to talk a little bit of news before we carry on, though, which is election update, because we've been doing some pre-recorded episodes.
Yeah.
Everything that we thought would happen, which is, of course, the Conservatives.
Starmer is becoming a little bit like the purges are happening, like earlier than we thought. It feels like the purges come earlier every year,
Yeah, so what happened with the purges that November is referencing is a number of people in the Socialist Campaign Group, or aligned with the Socialist Campaign Group wing of the party, like the people who have just been like living with a piece of dental tape holding up a sword of Damocles above their heads.
Yeah.
Oh my God, it finally snapped. What? Faiza Shaheen wasn't allowed to stand for election in Chingford and Wood Green because of some fucking Twitter likes from like years ago.
Yeah. It's like transparently a purge, but like these are all like the squishes, the soft left, the people who are like, we kind of like Corbyn, but like, we'll compromise. We'll work with anyone. We'll stay and fight, but not fight really. We'll just stay and kind of stay.
We're going to stay and get our shit rocked, basically.
We'll stay and shake our heads so people know we disagree with it.
Yeah. And it's sort of, to me, it seems like a kind of criminal lack of like situational awareness politically. Like with the sole exception for that being Diane Abbott, who could not really have done otherwise. But like for people like Faiza Shaheen or like, oh God, what's his name? The Brighton one.
Russell Moyle.
Moyle, yeah. Like it feels like having seen what like Team Starmer did to Rebecca Long Bailey, and then having seen everything that followed subsequently to that with Corbyn and with Abbott, it just seems like at some point you had to have noticed and then made the decision, I will probably be fine. RIP to those guys, but I'm different. And No, not sufficiently, it turns out. Faisal Shaheen, who has been tactfully silent about Gaza, like notably so, had said next to nothing, but the next to was not enough, you know?
Well, what happened was she liked a tweet which linked to a Jon Stewart sketch. The Daily Show was unacceptably Stalinist for these people.
Interesting. Name and CLP.
Yeah. Noted anti-Semite, Jon Stewart.
Well, that's the thing, right? In a clip he did about how, hey, we need to talk about Israel. Things seem kind of fucked up when you talk about Israel because the consequences of talking about Israel seem to be enormous. And it seems as though there are like professional organizations of people who, when you talk about Israel, will try and like destroy your character. And then she liked a tweet that said that. And then Luke Akehurst, newly selected for the Labour Party, and someone...
Professional vampire, and at one point, like, organizer of one of those organizations.
Not at one point, currently. That's his job.
Oh, still? Okay, perfect.
His job is to, like, yell at Gary Lineker when Gary Lineker is, like, not such a fan of what's going on in Gaza. It's to start a petition. His job is for an organization called We Believe in Israel to start a petition to, like, get Gary Lineker fired from the BBC. What's, like, Canary Mission other than that? What's, like, fucking Kevin O'Leary doing when he's saying, oh, yeah, if you go to a Palestine solidarity protest, we're going to use AI to make sure we and my buddies never hire you. Like, just going back to it, like, so yeah, to then say, oh, yeah, sorry, you can't notice that. It's not allowed for you to notice that. And fucking Akehurst gets selected for a safe seat. It's not suggesting like, oh, how unfair is it? But it is quite galling that this level of agreement. I mean, if we want to talk about...
If you want an example of hypocrisy, like all of the same people who are like, yes, you know, purge the traitors or whatever, and have been anytime this has happened, were all like crying constantly anytime Corbyn did anything. And if there's one lesson to take from this, it's that like, if you ever get the opportunity, if you ever get the like brief kind of Corbyn window again, you have to give John McDonnell a gun.
You have to let him garrot people.
Yeah, you can make no apologies for the terror, right? Because like all of the people who are complaining about it will do much, much worse to you if they seize power again.
It also just seems like we're getting to like increasing levels of abstraction. Like Labour MP liked a video from years ago by a Jewish comedian talking about how if you criticize Israel, you just get yelled at from all sides. Not even making a specific criticism of Israel, but just pointing out that Israel has a very aggressive PR wing. And like that's too much.
Apparently.
Yeah.
Don't notice that anymore.
All of this, it's not in the name of doing anything. I mean, for Akehurst it is. He really believes in Israel. But as a party organization, you know, we talk about like the purposes of systems or what they do. This is all in the name of jobs for Starmer's friends and the friends of his close advisors who are basically just being scattered out of London like dandelion seeds.
I can't wait until these fuckers turn the knives on each other. I really can't.
Of course they will. I mean, the alternative is that the purpose of it is purging as a hobby.
Oh, like me as a 15-year-old.
Yeah, I was going to say, bulimic Starmer.
Sorry, please go ahead.
No, they will turn the knives on each other and then they will turn the knives eventually on themselves. The end game of this is one guy alone in a room with no arms, holding a pen in his mouth so he can tap out an expulsion letter to his legs. It's Judge Dredd and the Jigsaw disease is how this ends up.
Yeah, like it's the one guy with no arms and legs writing with his mouth on a piece of paper the words total expulsion.
Yeah.
Will the last one expelled from the Labour Party turn off the lights?
Yeah. Confidentially leaking to the Times about his liver.
Very hard to be bulimic with no arms as well. You've really got to be committed.
I always wonder, you know, and if we want to talk about things as being like shielding themselves from accountability, I always thought like the way that you talk about accountability in the book, Dan, right? It's about people being able to exercise some meaningful control over how they are themselves controlled, whether that's through companies, whether that's government departments, or even like whether that's the guys who work in airport hangars having to shred a bunch of squirrels that they're not really keen on doing, right?
Yeah, but a bunch of squirrels doing Tony Benn's kind of like test of like, who are you? How can we get rid of you kind of thing.
Yeah, and you know, so much of this is about breaking that link between like what people want for their lives and what they as politicians have to deliver. And I mean, what I always remember about the Corbyn project is what that threatened them with was we might have to do something for someone that isn't just playing thick of it with our friends. basically. And what the whole point of the Starmer project is essentially armor. It is armoring an elite group so it never has to cycle and can just stay elite forever. The jobs for the boys they get to stay in them for life. And what's going to happen to we already know what's going to happen to politics when it's shielded from accountability in that way, which is that the things that happen over the last 12 years happen.
Well, the things that happened over the last 12 hours. Even.
Yeah.
Like, as you see by Streeting's kind of thing of being like, I will double down on this kind of like emergency punitive measure that's going to kill a bunch of children.
Wes Streeting never went through puberty and it never did him any harm. So.
Giving Wes Streeting puberty unblockers.
He does look kind of like a sort of a hot dog that's been squeezed into a suit, doesn't he?
Extrusive about him.
Yeah.
Yes, yeah.
He looks like one of those inflatable men you get outside a used car dealership. Like,
I'll tell you what it is. Wes Streeting is not actually a person. He is 400 squirrels that have been reconstituted into a man, like Terminator 2.
You know what Wes Streeting looks like? He looks like they put the Megabus man on Ozempic. Anyway, those are my Wes Streeting thoughts.
Apart from anything else, it's humiliating to have your rights taken away from you by these fucking people, you know?
Yeah, it is unfortunate.
Yeah.
But the worst thing, I think, in deselecting Faiza Shaheen is that the Labour Party has now effectively robbed us of the possibility of Ian Duncan Smith writing The Devil's Tune 2, Say Hello to His New Uncle.
I don't know. I mean, maybe opposition won't keep him very busy.
Two devil, two tune.
Anyway, but before we get into the book as well, and again, this is going to be sort of, let's say, thematically appropriate, I want to talk about a company. That company is called Future Fit AI.
Mm.
Now, I know that Dan has read the notes. However, I don't know if the rest of you have.
I've never read anything in my life, and I especially don't prepare for
What do you think Future Fit AI is?
It's like police photo fits, except it like makes them way worse.
Mm.
Like anytime like Kent Police or whatever posts like a photo fit of a guy who looks like they've drawn a face onto a mango.
Yeah, like a character from Wii Sports that they're searching in connection with armed robbery.
Yeah. It's going to be like that, but it's going to be like way worse.
Yeah. Is it like an AI that spots you at the gym? You know, it's coming over, it's saying like, those are nice gains, brother.
My personal trainer says easy money, and it makes me feel so good about myself.
Because training you is so easy. Is that this guy's a real mark? I've got him running laps and I'm just on my phone. Easy money, Riley.
Okay, all right. No, it's not that. Future Fit AI is empowering workers with a GPS for your career.
A what?
What?
Sorry that you have to ask.
Take your career down this side street to avoid traffic.
Recalculating.
Yeah.
I followed the GPS without looking, and now my career is sinking in a lake. We partner, they say, with Fortune 500 companies, workforce development organizations, and governments to provide workers with an AI-powered tool to help them navigate their careers. We use advanced labor market data and ethical machine learning algorithms. That's like one of my favorite things now is ethical machine learning algorithms. There was this idea in Canada in the 2000s that came out of Alberta called ethical oil. It was like...
Oh, like clean coal.
Canadian tar sands oil doesn't come from human rights abusing countries. And, you know, you could ask a lot of First Nations people about that and they would wonder.
Yeah.
But so this is actually much more ethical. So it doesn't matter that you're putting CO2 in the atmosphere because it's like a sort of morality offset. But this is my second favorite use of ethical with ethical machine learning algorithms. What the fuck does that mean? We have no idea.
Well, it's ethical machine learning because, like, obviously the machines are learning. They're doing lessons, but the lessons that they're doing is citizenship and PSHE. So they're like...
We've got Catherine Burblesing teaching the machine learning algorithms.
The Miss Snuffy AI.
Yeah, the machine learning algorithms are going to be wearing a like very rigid uniform.
Ethical machine learning algorithms to identify an individual's starting point in the labor market, recommend best fit career path destinations, and build a personalized roadmap of learning resources and work opportunities to successfully guide them from point A to point B in their career.
Oh, motherfucker, they're automating your, like, job coach, job center, like, work advisor guy. I've often thought that this, like, lackadaisical but also punitive area of the state could be really enhanced by adding this air of nonsense to it.
You're all too young to remember a program called JigCal, which they had in the 1980s. It ran on a BBC Micro, and everyone had to fill in a little form. And at my school, you got something mailed back to you from Strathclyde University saying that you should be a farmer.
The only thing I've ever had mailed back to me from Strathclyde University was, you should not study at Strathclyde University.
Have you considered farming?
Yeah.
That's when the farmers, you suspiciously at the same time get a prospectus from an agricultural college.
Chances of any actual artificial intelligence involved in this product, I would say very low. Chances of it being the same basic thing that they were doing in the literal 1980s, of a small questionnaire matched up to a small, very small list of jobs, I would say pretty high. Chance of it doing anything other than just typing in the name of a job to Google and getting the same job listings that you get from Google, very, very low.
That's a shame, because I don't like it, but I appreciate the kind of element of chaos you get out of like large language models. And so I think it's the same thing as with like anything we've talked about before. I want my job coach to be like, have you considered covering your CV in glue? You know, or something like that.
Yeah, then they can't put it down. Yeah.
It will make you a memorable candidate when they're doing the sift. Like,
yeah, the boffins at Strathclyde University have come up with a novel way to solve our farmer shortage. These children think they're getting careers advice, but no, they're just being pushed into laboring.
I like the idea also that it's like suggesting you go to an agricultural college, and it's like, oh yeah, what happened? Why does it think I should go to an agricultural college? And it looks at the answer where you're like, I can drink 4 bottles of vodka in one sitting, and I don't mind drinking this.
I love gilets.
If the dataset just sucks in that viral list of funny jobs from the 19th century census and says you should become a proprietor of midgets.
So it says you get a personalized assessment to identify your starting point.
it's not, though, because you dispersonalized it.
Yeah.
Like, you get a computerized assessment.
You get something that looks like a personalized assessment.
Uh-huh.
You get career path recommendations, learning programs to help you bridge your skill gap, resources to enhance your job readiness, and opportunities to live work opportunities to maximize placement. As Dan says, this is Googling things.
Yeah. If you remember the AI that became fixated on the Golden Gate Bridge, this is like one that's become fixated on farming, you know? Just like, pick strawberries. Just diverges every conversation back to picking strawberries.
Pick strawberries and then participate in an elaborate and dangerous hazing ritual.
Yeah, this AI is actually a small language model, and its entire code base was based off of Pip Goes Strawberry Picking. So it has quite a narrow range of suggestions that it tends to make.
We made a computer watch 3 seasons of Clarkson's Farm, and it's now going to give you career advice.
Like, this is the best job in the world.
So here's why that matters for what we're talking about, though, right? This isn't just like a thing you could sign up to get a better job. The Department for Work and Pensions is currently, as we speak, trialing this technology to connect job seekers with new roles.
See, this is the thing as well, is that like, because the government is insisting that it's out of money and it can't print more, it's like, we're going to make savings by using innovative technology. But the way they do that is by spaffing a bunch of money up the wall on this shit like this that is not going to work for like no return meaningfully.
Well, so basically, this is the press release. It says the technology being used works by asking people looking for work a series of questions, building an online profile.
Do you like farming? Can you see yourself farming? Do you know what a strawberry is? Have you tried picking one?
Have you ever driven a combine harvester?
What do you think of Jeremy Clarkson? Who's the hottest insurance mascot?
It says, what do you think of Jeremy Clarkson? And it's like, rank the races. And it's like, what? What's the last one? Which race is...
Number 1, wacky.
Which race is funniest?
Yeah. Oh, the steeplechase.
Monaco Grand Prix.
According to the DWP, the software from these firms, this is Future Fit AI, another company called Bayes Impact, which is a French organization, and a UK jobs board called Adzuna.
Wait, isn't that French for fuck impact?
I was going with the like thing covering snooker tables, but yeah, sure, fuck impact also.
It refers to Thomas Bayes, but it is very funny that they're so Anglo that they didn't think that their name in French would be.
Bayes Impact, wir suchen dich.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, there's Bayes Impact, there's Bayes Sensation, there's Bayes Shibari. According to the DWP, a software from these firms makes intelligent suggestions based on live data about the local jobs market.
It searches Google.
Some great live data on there.
It searches Google, or it uses a pre-existing source of information, Adzuna. all it's doing is it is trying to like help you search that jobs board. But what I always think about this, and why I think about this in terms of accountability, or at least like the ability of a powerful organization with the power to change something using sort of deception essentially to not do that, is we've all been living with the lie that most people on benefits in Britain just need to be like pushed into a job, despite the fact that a lot of those people would be living in places where the only industry packed up and moved out like 2 generations ago and nothing came back to replace it.
People just don't want to farm anymore.
Well, this is basically the idea, is that, like, I mean, there was an interview in the FT with the insane former head of the National Farmers Union the other week along those lines of like, oh, we can't get like
it's weird because I thought all those guys were really normal.
Yeah. Well, this one was like, yeah, we can't get British people to farm anymore, which listen to some of our episodes with Emiliano Molino to find out why, because it's fucking miserable work. But like, yeah, and it's part of the reason, but part of the reason is also that like a bunch of people can't work because they're disabled or because there are no jobs that they can get to or things of this nature. But no, instead what we need to do is we need to hand them a kind of Google printout that just says farming is a sphere of human activity first begun in the Fertile Crescent region of Mesopotamia. Or whatever the fuck.
You have to commute to the Fertile Crescent region in Mesopotamia from where you live out like in Luton.
Get on your ox cart and look for work.
Yeah, no one was fucking signing on in ancient Mesopotamia, were they? I tell you what, Hammurabi wasn't handing out handouts, benefits.
Because if you had to sign on in ancient Mesopotamia, you had to do it in like a clay tablet. You know, it's very inconvenient.
I had to do it in cuneiform.
Most of the temples literally were actually handing stuff. Everyone was signed on.
I am long-term sick and unable to work in the sesame fields. And it's just like scratch.
Guy who's like a Return with a V guy, but for ancient Mesopotamia. That was the last time that stuff wasn't woke, actually.
That's just Sargon of Akkad, I think.
But we talk about this in terms of like of accountability. You know, we talk about the continuing pursuit of like the job seekers model of trying to sort of forcing people to serve capital in places where capital has no interest in being served. Basically,
poking the sick, aging, disabled, humiliated population and being like, why don't you want to pick strawberries?
I mean, accountability is agency. You know, the extent to which you can be accountable for something is the extent to which you can change it so it wasn't so, and vice versa. And so if you're in one of these organizations, what you need to do is create the impression that the person without a job has agency and can change their status, but you have no ability to change what's being offered to them or do anything because you've pushed everything onto the computer. And the computer is just science, it's like physics, and there's no way you can change it. And so you create this reverse accountability where the Department of Work and Pensions has no responsibility to provide anything, but then the individual person has all of the accountability and gets blamed for not kind of fitting into the box that they want to put them in.
In things like future fit AI or whatever, or, you know, these or job centers or anything you want to talk about it, it's essentially trying to like, I don't know, lubricate a passage to nowhere. It's like, oh, you're not going to be able to get through this like...
Didn't know I'd had GRS yet.
It's trying to make it very much easier to sort of walk down a hallway that doesn't fucking lead anywhere.
Didn't know I'd had GRS.
I can't get down this hallway. There is no door on the other end. And the response from government is just say, don't worry, we'll make it slipperier. Well, it's going to be so easy to walk to nowhere, to walk up this staircase that just has a sheer drop on the end of it.
As terrible of a show as Little Britain was, and as odious of a man in particular as David Walliams was, I have to say the Computer Says No sketch has got to be one of the most prescient ones of the 2000s. But I think they just didn't predict the extent to which it would be just like the government looking at their own computer and being like, nah, it says we can't do that.
They say, Future Fit provides AI-powered tools that act as GPSs for careers designed to support individuals from career path exploration to reskilling to job placement.
Yeah, it's like fucking Uber for getting off benefits. Fine, whatever.
AI career coach Bob will provide personalized action plans.
Bob.
So again, it's like we've invented a fake person to pretend to try to help you have not agency so the people with agency don't have to do anything.
Yeah, Bob is there to keep telling you to like stop being disabled or whatever.
Yeah. But hey, you know what? If you have like a long-term like back injury maybe picking strawberries will help. You can limber up that way.
It's gentle exercise.
Well, I mean, but also, we are actually pretty close to full employment. The people who are claiming benefits, or the people who are not part of the labour force, are for the most part either long-term sick or retired early. So you've got someone who's nominally claiming out-of-work benefits, but actually has no intention of working because they're close to retirement, they can see the pension age around the corner, and they're living off their savings. You can put Bob in there as much as you like. It's not going to change the outcome, which is that we fundamentally created a system that destroys people's health and that people don't want to participate in. And you can say now, Bob tells you that you used to be an electrical engineer, so you should now be an electrician on a farm. The only reason possibly why the Department of Work and Pensions would buy this is that someone was selling it to them on commission.
Oh, that was almost certainly the case. Yeah. I mean, if we've learned anything about British procurement, it's that there will be someone's uncle has developed this computer system. Someone's pub landlord has built an AI.
I want to move sort of on to the actual book, right? This book, The Unaccountability Machine, basically investigates this trend where bad things are happening and they don't seem to be anybody's fault. And I see a lot of what you describe as ways to, in one sense, deflect individual responsibility for bad but quote-unquote necessary decisions off of named individuals. You can always, in circular loops that you can never find the end of, but also a kind of advertising to people that it must be thus, or it's your fault, or a kind of like ideological activity. So why don't you just tell us a little bit about how we should understand decision-making as industrialized, and when decision-making is industrialized, it diffuses and becomes very difficult to control.
Yeah, well, I mean, as I said, the fundamental kind of definition here is if you can change something, then you can be accountable for it. And being accountable is psychologically horrible. It's financially risky because you could get sued. And it's just not consistent with being a manager. The big privilege of being a manager is that you should not be one of the people who's having to be managed and having to respond to other people telling you what to do. And so if you want to avoid that, you have to create a sort of accountability sink into which you can redirect all of the unwanted consequences, negative emotion, and accountability that's coming your way. And the way you do that is by creating the impression that the decision is not yours, that it's the result of some objective kind of process. So you say, well, I've commissioned this report which summarizes a load of medical science, and that's the decision. It's not me making the decision. It's all of these scientists that you're never going to look up. Or you can say, well, this is the Office of Budget Responsibility, and they've got a spreadsheet, and you can see that this line is heading upward rather than downward. So that means we've got to cancel £10 billion worth of youth clubs. Or you just do the ultimate accountability sink and say, well, the markets won't stand this. And so anyone who feels like they don't like the consequences of a policy decision you've made, you say, well, don't ask me, ask the market. Say, can I have the phone number for the market? And you go, oh, well, sadly, there is no phone number. This thing that looks like it might be a decision I took and looks like it might be a thing I'm doing to you is in fact just the weather. No point complaining about it. That's the way it's going to be. Remember to turn out and vote in 5 years' time.
Me painted blue at the top of a step pyramid. The priest holding a knife over me just says, look, it's not my fault. This is the sun's decision.
Economic decision.
Step pyramid, no. I'm stuck in the ziggurat.
One of the things you also talk about is you talk about sort of the emergence of different kinds of management science that pervade both the private and public sector. And you draw a difference between two ways of trying to manage complex systems. The sort of the cybernetic approach versus the straightforward computing approach. And while that seems a little bit abstract, I think it's worth just quickly getting into the distinction between a cybernetic approach to managing a complex system versus what you might call a computing approach.
Yeah. I mean, and this kind of came out from kind of trying to ask, why are people creating accountability sinks. And the reason is that they didn't feel in control of the decisions. They didn't feel like they should be accountable because everything was so complex that everyone literally felt that they were just buffeted by social forces they couldn't understand. And this was what led me back to looking at random old 1970s hippie management science. There was such a thing. Books by a guy called Stafford Beer, who people might have heard about because he was involved with the Allende government in Chile for a very short period of time. Exactly, cyber. And what this was saying, well, look, if you're going to manage something, you can either be going number go up, and we're optimizing this, and we're going to pick some measure of the output, and we're always going to say that's got to go up. Or you can think, well, we don't necessarily know that that number that's going up is summarizing everything we should know about this system. It probably isn't because we've only got partial information. So let's think about this in terms of what do we have to do to keep control of that number? What do we have to do about this system to keep it regulated? And that lets you use a load of the old mathematics and physics of information theory to say, very fundamental theorem, you want to regulate and manage something, you have to match the amount of chaos and variety and information that the system can generate with the capacity to manage it. So you effectively have to say the system that's controlling this has to be capable of dealing with what's going to be thrown at it. And if you think about that kind of to make it a bit more objective in a corporate situation, that means you need this big buffer of middle management because you need this big buffer of capacity to be sure that when something odd happens or when the world changes, you're going to know about it and you're going to be able to deal with it. But then the 1970s happened, Milton Friedman and shareholder value came along, and you got a whole load of private equity goons coming around doing leveraged buyouts, looking at all these middle managers and saying, don't know what this is for, I never use it, and effectively just kind of cutting out the cerebellum of these organizations. And so the organizations get stupider and stupider and more focused on number go up kind of thinking. And, after a while, it's like I seem to be doomed to only use really, really tasteless veterinary analogies. It's like the patient in a horrible neuroscience experiment. You've cut out so much of its cerebellum that it's only able to deal with the situation exactly in front of it. And if anything unexpected happens, it doesn't know how to react. And, that's my kind of brief potted history of the last 50 years. Gradually, the governments, corporations, and other systems have got more fixated on computing optimization and single value maximization, and they've lost the ability to manage information coming in from the environment.
That's fine. Didn't need that anyway.
Yeah.
If you wanted to map that onto our understanding of the history of the 20th century, as we talk about it on this podcast, you'd see the kind of 1970s and late 1970s and 1980s as the kind of decision that capital made that it would no longer concern itself with social reproduction. It would enter its sort of vampire vandal phase of destroying the many complex systems that it created to sustain itself. If you wanted to think about something like Boeing as well, for example, you'd think of that as a company that was evil but basically functional, that was taken over by people who didn't really care about trivialities like how the airframes worked, or do we have enough bolts in this door, and would be sort of very happy to say like, oh yeah, that's fine, we can accept a certain number of of crashes, because they have that very sort of, you might call, short-termist thinking. You'd see it's like it is the vandalism of evil but at least functional organizations, right?
Well, evil but functional was too expensive is the thing.
Well, and it's something they didn't even necessarily know they were doing to themselves, because all of the problem was in their information processing infrastructure. The way that you calculate to see if you're matching the information of the system to the handling capacity is through the accounting system. And the one job of an accounting system, one job of an accounting system, is to tell you how much extractable surplus there is, how much extractable rent you can take out. And the accounting system breaks down where it tells you there's a load of rent here, you can extract a load of surplus here, and it's wrong, and the system isn't actually producing the conditions of its own reproduction anymore. And and that's what happened, because these things were all geared towards short-term financial reporting. They were all loaded up with a huge amount of debt. And if you're loaded up with a huge amount of debt as a company, then the only thing you can think about is, how am I going to pay the debt? You can't spare any capacity for thinking about anything else, because if you don't solve that problem of how am I going to pay the debt, you're not going to get a chance to address any of your longer term problems.
So, for example, Thames Water is just a perfect example of that.
Well, it's going fine over there.
It was an organization that basically worked, that changed its outlook from a company that had lots and lots of employees, many of whom worked on water mains, that where its goal wasn't number maximization, but its goal was make sure there is water, keep poo in water to acceptable minimum. And when it gets privatized, that same thing happens. It gets very smart at doing the thing that the people who own it want. It gets very stupid at making water go into people's homes.
Well, they hired the Cocoa Pops monkey, and he kept pooing in the water. And he had huge tits.
It gets loaded with gigantic amounts of debt. That debt creates further incentives for it to continue that kind of maximizing. With the government, the DWP, for example, same thing. The whole point of the DWP, so to speak, is get people off benefits. That's what they want to be. That's what their mission is. And again, that's not a good mission to have, but that is a mission. And you can see again how carrying out that mission in the way that they are doing it is perpetuating the kind of you'd call it very enervating work environment that most people seem to find themselves in. It makes people more sick, and it makes people less likely to be able to do the kind of thing that they would want to do with their lives. But the thing is, if you imagined a version of the Department of Work and Pensions that worked in a more cybernetic way, that was, let's say, that was accountable, that could do things, that acknowledged that it could do things to make people's working lives better, right? Imagine that would have to be a very large department. It would have a lot of resources. As you say, Dan, it would need a lot of variety, which is how you describe a sort of complex system in cybernetic terms. And nobody really wanted to do that because of that great act of vandalism that occurred in the 1970s and 80s.
Yeah, and crucially, it would consume a huge amount of resources that appeared on a budget while producing benefits that didn't appear on the same budget. And so unless you've got someone in the center who's able to understand what the costs and benefits are, you're just going to get Treasury brain, 28-year-olds with PPE degrees from Oxford looking at the costs and saying, my God, this thing's expensive. We clearly better shut it down. Same with Thames Water. How do you go bust selling water? It's a popular product. It doesn't need advertising.
People don't want water anymore. They want Monster Energy and Lucozade. It's a tough market.
Yeah. And the answer is that you can go bust selling water if you borrow enough debt. If you borrow enough debt, you can turn a literal water and sewage monopoly into a risk, something that's riskier than .com AI stocks.
I should have put some limes or something in it,
Yeah, there you go. Thames Water's best hope at getting your water from one of those little things they have on the bar at the pub. Thames Water's best hope is that Boeing accidentally 9/11 their biggest creditor.
So, you write in your book, whether it's in the guise of the bond market, which necessitates austerity, tax cuts and deregulation, or as a generalized amorphous maker of decisions that can't be blamed on any individual, the market, which you referenced earlier, has encroached into areas that were previously considered the normal business of government. Nationalized industries are privatized and often sold overseas, and even some fundamental functions that older political scientists might have seen as core to the nature of government, like the power to set the level of taxes or control the money supply, have to a greater or lesser extent been removed from the public sphere, which essentially, and I'm adding this on here as well, makes the whole idea that an apolitical central bank with a 2% inflation target is a kind of accountability sink, because everyone gets to point to reasons beyond their control as to why life in Britain has to be made markedly worse.
Yeah, with the woke bankers who did for Liz Truss.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, and the thing is, when you push these things outside the government, it's just permanent vandalism, because it's permanent cerebral vandalism. As you move the function out of the government, you also move the capacity to tell whether the function is being abused out of the government. So not only is Thames Water itself unable to do anything other than pay dividends outside, but you also lose the capacity to understand that your water company has been underinvesting for 10 or 15 years until someone at Ofwat comes around, kind of looks at a few spreadsheets and says, this is the sort of thing that people go for prison for in other industries.
There's another thing that I often think of, right? Which is if you want to start making these organizations accountable again, there have been some fantastic rearguard actions taken to prevent that from happening. Simply because the transformation of the British state, but this is not just true for Britain, it's true for a lot of European and American states and the sort of departments within them, has become an organization that primarily contracts things out to arm's length bodies. So all of a sudden, if you nationalize Thames Water, well, Thames Water contracted most of their operations out to like third-party like service providers. So if you were to try to nationalize Thames Water, what would you nationalize? What kind of expertise would you run it with? It's not saying it's not worth doing. It's absolutely worth doing, but rather recognizing that this sort of denuding of the state of these kinds of expertise has been a fantastic way to prevent accountability from being added back in, because you prevent yourself from being able to competently administer in ways that are democratically accountable crucial services.
Absolutely, yeah.
That phrase, permanent cerebral vandalism, has stuck with me, both because I think it's a very apt description and also because I think it's a very Disco Elysium phrase.
Yeah, I was going to say Aphex Twin album title. Yeah.
But you more than just the government, like the state as well. You give a lot of examples in the book of companies, and you talk about how organizations can become criminogenic.
Oh, good criminology term there. Love a bit of criminogenesis.
Yeah. Without anyone ever actually breaking a law who's important, they can make it so that you have to pretty much constantly break the law. I mean, the example that you give is Fox News, specifically with regard to like everybody at Fox News knew that the Dominion voting machines were like fine, but they all just were like, well, I guess we just have to libel them all the time.
Yeah.
British tabloid press, exactly the same, becoming dependent on phone hacking.
Yeah. You know, it's not so much that anyone told anyone to go out and hack phones, although some people did that, but not necessarily the ones you want to see in prison for it. And they just set up a system in which you'd probably get fired if you didn't hack phones, and omitted to set up any system that would not hack phones or not libel companies. You know, I mean, I wrote my previous book about financial fraud, and this was the libel conspiracy. No one ever made a conspiracy. No one just ever kind of set things up so that there wouldn't be one. They just sat back and said, you know, here's your target, make me $100 million, lads. I'm not checking up on how you do it. And then came back in 10 years' time going, we're shocked and appalled that anything like this could have happened in our bank.
We are shocked and appalled that the Atreides were actually killed and not given the honor of exile. And this is something I think also gets to the heart of the book as well, right? Which is whether you're talking about criminogenic organizations, whether you're talking about government departments sort of finding ways to make everyone else accountable. I mean, sorry, before I go on as well, I mean, you can just, this is mostly in like Labor and the Democrats are constantly saying, oh, we have no agency to win. All of our people who hate us they are the only ones with the agency. Like, you know, like left-wingers who live in like London safe seats, they actually are controlling whether or not we get a Labor government. But I digress. At the heart of the book, whether you're talking about like criminogenic companies, whether you're talking about government departments that are sort of handing off agency left and right or utility providers, whatever, ultimately, you say that ignorance is a kind of information processing system in itself. And the professionals who tend to run these systems in that sort of maximizing or minimizing sense, they very, very deliberately have to remain ignorant of how the insides of firms and institutions work, how the insides of particular like labor markets might work.
It's our friend intellectual lacunae again.
Yeah. And in many ways, it's frightening but also hopeful, because it does mean that there's an inbuilt certainty of collapse. If you are going to avoid accountability, you have to make yourself ignorant of certain things. You have to cut those information links. If you cut off part of the information, then sooner or later, your accounting system is going to tell you that there's an extractable rent when, in fact, the system is not reproducing itself. If that happens, sooner or later, the system will walk into something it can't handle and fall apart.
The Tsar is convinced everything is going very well.
Yeah. No, it's Last Days of Haile Selassie. Exactly.
Someone should do some kind of podcast about that.
Great episode, guys. Well worth the extra money.
Thank you so much.
And when that happens, the ideas that replace it are going to be the ones that were lying around in the street in exactly the same way as when in the 1970s, the capitalist class got very worried about the managerial class taking all of their perks, goodies, and treats. It was Milton Friedman's ideas that were lying around in the street, and those were ones that were picked up.
And we can even see that a lot of the, let's say, frictionless trade maximizing, a lot of the neoliberal sort of ideas that fell apart, they picked up new ideas. They that sort of kind of came what are called securonomics. I mean, we're sort of in the process of seeing one of those information processing systems having broken down enough that it had to become at least recognizably a bit different.
That's why I'm printing off thousands of copies of my manifesto for more and sexier MILFs and just leaving them lying around the street.
Thank you for giving me the co-author credit on that. It's very appreciated.
I thought it was spiritually correct.
Oh, thank you.
Also,
Yeah.
I note that we are beginning to run to time. So I just want to say, Dan, as always, a delight to talk to you. Thank you very much for coming on the show.
Oh, thank you very much. It's always fun. Great show.
It was enlightening as always.
You can, of course, check out the Unaccountability Machine anywhere fine books are sold. You could also check out Trash Future, the podcast, in Edinburgh on August 14th.
You can.
You could listen to it on a podcast like app.
Yeah, but you can also come to Edinburgh and see us with your human eyes.
Yeah. Tickets to that are selling very fast indeed. So
Just start getting bigger venues.
That's right. So,
yeah.
Edinburgh, August 14th. Come to see us. If you can't do that, go to see Milo. He will be variously around the country.
Yeah, there are many London dates. Look on my website. Also, Bristol on the 21st of June. Please get tickets to that. Always fun to do Bristol. That's new material. I'm also doing, I think, Edinburgh on the 2nd of July and Manchester at some point, so keep an eye out for those. But most importantly, my special voicemail is available to purchase online now. It will eventually be available free on YouTube, but if you buy it, you will A, offset the horrendous costs of making it, and B, get special bonus content that no one else gets, and also early access by a few weeks. So if you feel like supporting that, then please go to the link in the description.
Milo will also be playing a surprise show in Amsterdam with his new prop act where he works with 400 squirrels.
That's right. And one severely overworked NutriBullet. Making the world's worst smoothie, guys.
I think on that, it's time to end. Dan, thank you very much again.
15,000 calories.
Thanks very much.
Thank you very much for
But it's
listening.
all protein. The gains!
Don't forget, there's a Patreon. You can subscribe
What's
to
my
it.
pre-workout have a tail coming out of it?
It's $5 a month. There's also a $10 tier for extra Britanology, extra Left on Red. November and I had COVID this month, but we promise we're going to get the next Aubrey Maturin book out on the $10 tier soon. I think that's all the plugs and all the end matter. So we will see you in a few days in the bonus episode. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.